The Souls series feels like it's been around much longer than it has been. That's not to say that 8 years is a short period of time, but it's gained a level of ubiquity surprising for a series that's been around less than a decade. The reason? For many, Dark Souls is hardcore gaming. It starts there, and in a lot of cases, finishes as well. The Souls games have consistently shown an expertise in level design and momentum-based controls. I'm Falcon, and today on gameranx we want to detail the evolution of Dark Souls. In 1994 through 1996, From Software released a series of games for the PlayStation console called Kingsfield, which, if we're talking about where Dark Souls came from, we can't skip. It was a first-person game that was fairly slow-moving and depended a lot on strategy in a fairly sparse, brooding environment. The Kingsfield series had an extremely polarized reaction from both gamers and the press alike. It placed a focus on exploration and was not really what you would call an action-packed game, and considering it was one of the first PlayStation titles, that first couple years the system exists, there were a lot more fast-paced games that kept people's thirst for more action-packed products quenched. That said, the people that liked it loved it. It had a certain ambience to it that you really couldn't get anywhere else, especially in the very colorful mascot platformer world of the 1990s. The same things that were criticized were often the things that people liked about it as well. For instance, some people said, the character movement's too slow, there aren't enough NPCs, the colors are dingy and dark. It's funny to hear that list of criticisms today, because that includes a lot of the things that we like about Dark Souls. It was clear that Kingsfield found an audience. However, it had a long way to go, as did From Software. They made games at an absolute breakneck pace for over a decade from that point, honing their craft, until in 2006, they embarked on the development of a game that they considered a spiritual successor to Kingsfield. 2 years later, Demon's Souls was released for the PlayStation 3, where Kingsfield was a breath of fresh air for its dingy, colorless environments. Demon's Souls was competing with a lot of other games with similar color palettes. Everything that Kingsfield tried to do, Demon's Souls did. It's a game that prioritizes atmosphere and gives you an almost turn-based approach to real-time combat. You have to have a strategy, you can't button mash in Demon's Souls. Progression is slow, and you find yourself repeating areas multiple times because you don't really know what's going on there. And herein lies the real charm of Demon's Souls, and indeed the entire series. It takes things that would normally frustrate you and turns them into a reason to play the game. In moving to third person and creating a combat system that heavily relied upon shields, dodging, and timing, Demon's Souls unified a lot of the concepts that many developers had tried to do for many years. This was an RPG that looked like an action game and could be labeled an action RPG, but it's hard for me to call it anything but an RPG. It exemplifies the idea of creating a world and applying very specific rules that can be used in order to get ahead, but can also come crushing down on your head. Demon's Souls is a tough game, but believe it or not, that wasn't born out of a want to make it tough, but rather, director Hidetaka Miyazaki wanted to create a sense of accomplishment. He and his team went out of their way to create not just a difficult game, but a game with environmental symbolism that visually told you a story without getting too deeply into it. It also had a very interesting online element, but more interestingly enough, the single-player experience contained a connected element that showed the ghosts of other players that were nearby. In some respects, this could give you a hint as to where things were, such as maybe a hidden passage or a switch or a door. You could also see other people's deaths, and there were plenty of them because it was a tough game, by activating bloodstains left by other players. Demon's Souls wasn't fully an open world, but you pretty much had free reign to go where you wanted within the world of the game, and could sort of pick your own adventure as far as how you did it. And then there were the boss battles, gargantuan, grotesque, massive boss battles. Sometimes it felt harder to get to the boss than it was to beat the boss. But the most important thing about them was how unique every boss battle was. From Software set out to ensure that a boss was not a repetitive experience. A lot of intricate systems come together to make Demon's Souls the great game that it is. And from its namesake, Demon's Souls are used as the currency to upgrade your weapons and attributes. And you have to, because this game is tough. And it's not tough just to be tough. It's tough because it creates a world that has rules and then follows them. A lot of people may perceive it to be unfair on their first play, but once you spend some time in the world of Demon's Souls, things change. But Demon's Souls was only the beginning. A few years later, in 2011, Dark Souls made its debut. Where Demon's Souls had a hub world that acted as access to many different levels, Dark Souls is an open world. Of course, you don't necessarily have free reign just to go wherever you want. Certain areas were off limits until you beat certain bosses, and the world felt bigger, more real, and at the same time made you feel smaller. In Dark Souls, you had bonfires, which acted as save points. They weren't sparse, but they sure weren't plentiful. And this is an example of the level design that has put Dark Souls above other games. They're so perfectly placed as to not feel unfair, not feel impossible, but to make you go, hope another bonfire is coming up because I'm starting to run low on stuff here. And I would call that the general feeling that you have for most of the game. Not frustration, not helplessness, but urgency. At a bonfire, everything replenished. Your health, your spells, and unfortunately, all the enemies other than the boss. This is how the game worked. You were never allowed not to be on your toes. Fortunately, between Demon and Dark, the physics and accuracy in systems received a large amount of attention and polish. Dark Souls is a precision game. As I've already made abundantly clear, it does such a good job of making an action feel like a turn. Everything has to be done in a way that creates results, or your enemy will be the one who gets the results they want. An addition in Dark Souls was the Covenant system, which is an interesting idea that kind of plays out a little bit like a faction, or a little bit like a guild that one might join, but not quite the same. When you join one, you may get different benefits within the game world. Certain animals may ignore you, not attack, or certain traps might not spring. But not just for you. The game has similar online elements to Demon's Souls, but players who are nearby and in the same Covenant might feel the effects of a healing spell or miracle that you cast. Covenants can change the game wildly based on what class you are, or even just change what you're getting out of the game. For instance, some of them drastically change PvP, and some change how you level up in certain classes. But I think perhaps the most interesting part was how to join them. The leader of a Covenant wasn't necessarily some guy waiting around somewhere. It could be anything. I think one of the more notable ones is a cat on a windowsill. What they tried to get across with this is that you can't always take everything at face value, especially when you're playing a game that's meant to mess with your brain. Dark Souls 2 came in 2014, and while its mechanics didn't necessarily see a whole lot of change, the world did. Dark Souls 2 world is significantly larger than the first, although equally as dense as the first, which is very important. If you just make a bigger world, it doesn't matter. Every inch of a world needs to have some level of immersion, and From Software always nails that. But Dark Souls 2 did something that Dark Souls 1 didn't, and that was give you a little bit more of a reason to be doing what you're doing. Where the first depended more on a mythology, Dark Souls 2 gives you more of a motivation. Just like the original protagonist, you've been cursed and are undead, but your motivation here is to break that curse. While the plot remains minimalistic, and still a lot of the world needs to be pieced together in your head through observation and the finding of clues and pieces of information, all of this is significantly more well developed in Dark Souls 2, with every zone of the open world following much more thematic reveals of information, and again delving into the history. Small little plot points scattered all around the different zones and entire world all interconnect to allow you to kind of create a theory as to what used to be. In a way, Dark Souls 2 makes you feel as though you're a detective, but you're not just looking for clues as to what happened, you're looking for a way not to become a husk of a human being with no thoughts, feelings, or motivations. You're looking to save yourself. We can't talk about Dark Dark Souls 3 without talking about Bloodborne, so let's do just that. Bloodborne offers experimentation with the formula that it makes great sense to do after you make several games in a row that worked pretty much how you want them to. If you want to continue a series, it has to develop in ways other than here's more levels. Here's a new open world. Enjoy. Bloodborne takes the ideas of Dark Souls and asks you to incorporate agility into your approach and deprioritizes shielding. In fact, I would say the lumbering shield yourself approach of Dark Souls and Demon Souls is almost unusable in Bloodborne. Bloodborne forces you to re-examine what exactly the combat system is, and forces you to learn a different rhythm. That being said, it's still the same strategy, you just have to incorporate a different way of protecting yourself. In a lot of respects, this is a fantastic idea, and what it does is forces players who maybe weren't familiar to learn the rhythm of a Dark Souls battle in a manner that maybe looked more like a traditional action game to them. However, the game is still very, very hard. But another notable difference, an experiment, is the fact that Bloodborne kinda has a story. Oh sure, it's not a cutscene-laden Final Fantasy epic, but it does actually have something going on. It's interesting the Victorian world that it populates with a bleak look on religion. And as you, your character, get more and more engrossed, you see how they try to experiment with different ideas on the environmental storytelling of the Souls games and more direct narrative elements. Bloodborne actually went back to the hub world style of Demon Souls, but it's still a massive game in its own right, and the experiments put forward in it had an effect on Dark Souls 3. To call the third Dark Souls game a sum of all previous Souls and Souls-related games would be an understatement. The look of the world evokes Dark Souls 2, but the feel of the design evokes Dark Souls 1. The design feels very open and unencumbered, and it incorporates some of the ideas of Bloodborne, bringing agility into the mix and speeding the pace up a little bit. The ability to dual wield basically everything allows you to have the most customized possible approach to every single battle situation, and also takes a lot in its boss battles from Bloodborne as well. While you do see a lot of Dark Souls style attack, protect boss battles, you get some more open-ended ideas as well. The hope of the protagonist in this game is to prolong the Age of Fire, which is coming to an end and yields the Age of Dark, engulfing the world in undead. You can feel ideas and concepts from all of the games readily present in Dark Souls 3, and while it's not a perfect game, neither are any of the other ones. And it may not be the toughest of all of them, it's certainly the most well-rounded. It's the product of years of experience, and so perfectly fits together concepts from an entire series. My hope is that Dark Souls 3 is not the last Dark Souls game. And for a series that largely doesn't have a specific story, that's fairly impressive. Dark Souls 3 is a damn good game. What's your favorite Dark Souls? Let's meet in the comments and talk about that. There's some pretty in-depth arguments to be had about that, so I am very interested in what you have to say. If you enjoyed this video, please click like, and if you're not subscribed, now would be a great time to do just that. Thanks so much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.